In June 1628, a ship arrives in Salem carrying the largest fortune ever seen in New England, $100,000 in Spanish silver. Within days, it's gone. No thieves caught, no silver recovered. The ship's captain died under mysterious circumstances. This is America's first great heist, and the conspiracy goes higher than anyone suspected. June 7, 1628, Salem, Massachusetts. The settlement was barely 2 years old, a cluster of rough wooden buildings clinging to the coast, home to maybe 200 English settlers. Most were sick, hungry, and questioning their decision to leave England. Then a ship appeared on the horizon. The Abigail, a two-masted merchant vessel, sailed slowly into Salem harbor. She was battered, sails torn, hull damaged, clearly having survived rough weather or worse. But she was carrying treasure. Captain Thomas Cromwell reported to Governor John Endicott with news that seemed too good to be true. The Abigail had intercepted a Spanish merchant vessel off Hispaniola. This was legal. England and Spain were at war. English ships with privateering commissions, licenses from the Crown to attack enemy vessels, could legally seize Spanish cargo as prizes. Cromwell had such a commission. He'd been sailing the Caribbean hunting Spanish merchants when he found one, a vessel carrying silver from South American mines to Spain. After a brief fight, the Spanish surrendered. Cromwell's crew transferred the cargo to the Abigail, 47 wooden chests filled with Spanish silver reals. The estimated value, £20,000 sterling, in 1628 purchasing power, which is equivalent to over $100,000 in modern terms, was an enormous fortune. Salem had never seen anything like it. Endicott ordered the chests brought ashore under armed guard. They were stacked in a warehouse while he consulted with colony leaders about what to do. The legal situation was clear. Prize cargo belonged to the investors who'd financed the privateering venture. In this case, London merchants, who'd funded the Abigail's voyage. The silver should be shipped to England, inventoried, taxed, and distributed to investors. The colony would receive a small percentage, maybe 10%, as a fee for handling the cargo. But £20,000 could transform Salem. It could buy food for the starving settlers, purchase tools and supplies, finance expansion, pay for ships to bring more colonists. It could save the colony. And no one in London knew the silver existed yet. Abigail had come directly to Salem. Cromwell hadn't sent word ahead. The temptation was overwhelming. Endicott called a secret meeting with key leaders. Matthew Craddock's deputy, representing London investors, Reverend Francis Higginson, the colony's chief minister, John Winthrop, Jr., son of the future Massachusetts Bay governor. Visiting Salem, several prominent merchants, they discussed the situation late into the night. The consensus: Salem needed this silver more than London investors. God had delivered this fortune to them for a reason. It would be sinful not to use it to save the colony. But outright theft would bring royal investigation and probable hanging. The solution: borrow the silver, use it to purchase supplies and secure the colony, repay the investors over time from future profits. Technically not theft, just an unauthorized loan. It was a rationalization. But in their desperation, it sounded reasonable. There was one problem: Captain Cromwell. He knew the law, he knew the investors' rights, and he wasn't going to let a group of desperate Puritans steal his prize cargo. The conspiracy was about to turn deadly. Governor John Endicott was not a patient man. In his late 40s, he was a hardline Puritan who saw the world in absolutes: God's will or sin, order or chaos, survival or death. Salem's situation was dire. The 1627-28 winter had killed dozens of settlers. Food supplies were nearly exhausted. The fishing had been poor. Crops struggled in unfamiliar soil. London investors were losing faith. Letters from England suggested they might abandon the colony if it didn't become profitable soon. And now, providentially, God had delivered £20,000 in silver. Endicott saw this as divine intervention. The Lord had provided. It would be ungrateful, sinful even, to refuse the gift. Reverend Francis Higginson agreed. In his sermons, he'd been preaching about God's providence, about how the faithful would be rewarded. This silver was proof, but it was also legally someone else's property. The meeting on June 8 involved careful theological and legal reasoning. The legal argument. The silver was seized legally under Cromwell's privateering commission, but privateering law was complex and often disputed. Who exactly had the right to prize cargo? Investors? The Crown? The capturing crew? The colonial government that processed it? There was ambiguity. Endicott's legal advisor suggested they could claim a larger share than the traditional 10% based on Salem's role in securing and processing the cargo. The theological argument. Reverend Higginson proposed that God's providence superseded human contracts. If God delivered wealth to save his faithful colony, using it for that purpose was righteous. Sending it to wealthy London investors while Salem starved would be the true sin. The practical argument. John Winthrop, Jr., the most pragmatic of the group, pointed out that London was 3,000 miles away. Communication took months. If they acted quickly, they could spend the silver, generate profits, and repay investors before anyone discovered the arrangement. The plan took shape. 1. Acknowledge the silver's arrival in official records. They couldn't hide its existence completely. 2. Claim it required secure storage and assessment before shipping to England. Buying time. 3. Secretly spend portions of it through trusted merchants trading with the Caribbean and Dutch colonies where Spanish silver was common and wouldn't raise questions. 4. Use the silver to purchase supplies, ships and goods that would genuinely improve the colony's profitability. 5. Repay London investors gradually from increased colonial revenues, making it look like natural economic growth. It wasn't theft, they told themselves. It was a forced loan. God's providence was temporarily redirected for righteous purposes. The vote was unanimous. Proceed. But they needed cooperation from everyone who knew about the silver. The warehouse guards, the merchants who'd witnessed the unloading, Captain Cromwell's crew, and most critically, Captain Cromwell himself. Endicott approached him on June 9 with a proposal. Delay shipping the silver to London for a few months. Allow the colony to borrow a portion for emergency supplies. Cromwell would be compensated generously. Cromwell's response was immediate and unambiguous. Absolutely not. He threatened to sail the Abigail directly to London with the silver and a full report of Endicott's proposal. The conspiracy had a problem. 5 days later, Cromwell was dead. Captain Thomas Cromwell was a professional sailor, not a Puritan idealist. He'd spent 30 years at sea. He knew how prize cargo worked. He knew investor expectations. And he knew that the hungry look in Governor Endicott's eyes meant trouble. On June 10, Cromwell sent 2 of his most trusted crew members back to the Abigail with orders: inventory the silver precisely and guard it constantly. No one, including colonial authorities, could access it without his written permission. He wrote a letter to the London investors describing the prize capture and estimating its value. He planned to send it on the next ship to England, bypassing colonial authorities. Endicott learned of this immediately. Salem was too small for secrets and panicked. If Cromwell's letter reached London before the colony could act, the opportunity would be lost. Investors would send their own representatives to claim the cargo. Royal officials might get involved. Silver would be gone. On June 11, Endicott visited Cromwell at the inn where he was staying. The conversation was private, but witnesses reported raised voices. Endicott offered Cromwell a deal. £500 in immediate payment, more than Cromwell would normally receive as his captain's share, plus future considerations, in exchange for flexibility regarding the timing of the silver's transport to London. Cromwell refused. £500 was a pittance compared to his legitimate share of £20,000, and he didn't trust Puritan promises of future considerations. He told Endicott he'd be sailing for London within the week, silver secured aboard the Abigail with a full accounting for investors. Endicott left the inn visibly angry. That night, June 11-12, something changed. 2 colonial officials, later identified as Endicott's close associates, were seen boarding the Abigail after dark. They carried lanterns but left within an hour. Cromwell's crew, suspicious, asked their captain if everything was all right. Cromwell assured them it was. Just colonial bureaucrats doing an official inspection, but he was lying. Something in that visit had rattled him. On June 13, Cromwell told his first mate, William Bradford, no relation to the Plymouth governor, to prepare the ship for immediate departure. They'd leave for London in 2 days, silver or not. Bradford asked if they should inform the governor. Cromwell said no, just prepare quietly. June 14, morning. Cromwell was scheduled to meet with Endicott for a final discussion about the silver's disposition. He never arrived. His crew found him in his cabin aboard the Abigail, slumped over his desk, dead. The Colonial physician, Dr. Samuel Fuller, was summoned. His diagnosis: apoplexy, what we'd call a stroke. Cromwell had simply died of natural causes. Unfortunately, these things happened. The crew was suspicious. Cromwell was in his 40s, healthy, robust. He'd shown no signs of illness, but Dr. Fuller was certain. Natural death. The body was buried quickly. June 15, in Salem's small cemetery, Cromwell's first mate, Bradford, protested to Governor Endicott. He demanded an investigation. He suggested poison or suffocation. Endicott was sympathetic but firm. Dr. Fuller was a trained physician. His diagnosis was final. These accusations of foul play were unseemly and potentially slanderous. Bradford and the crew, outnumbered and far from home, had no recourse. But they noted something crucial. Within hours of Cromwell's death, Colonial officials began moving the silver from the Abigail to a secure warehouse. The theft was beginning. On June 16, 1628, under Governor Endicott's direct supervision, the 47 chests of Spanish silver were transferred from the Abigail to a warehouse in Salem. The official reason: proper security and inventory before transport to London. The warehouse was a sturdy wooden building near the waterfront, owned by a merchant named John Balch, one of the conspirators present at the secret June 8 meeting. 6 armed guards were posted. Colonial records show their names and payment records. Everything appeared official and proper. On June 20, just 4 days later, Governor Endicott announced that the silver had been stolen. According to his report, unknown thieves had overpowered the guards, broken into the warehouse, and removed all 47 chests. The guards, apparently, had seen nothing, heard nothing. The thieves had vanished like ghosts. It was the most absurd theft story imaginable. 47 chests of silver, each weighs approximately 100 pounds. Total weight, over 2 tons. To remove that much weight would require wagons, multiple men, hours of labor, and significant noise. Yet 6 armed guards noticed nothing. Endicott launched an investigation. The suspects he proposed: local indigenous peoples. Endicott suggested that Nomkeeg or other local tribes might have stolen the silver. Except indigenous peoples had no use for Spanish silver coins, no means to transport 2 tons of metal undetected, and no motive for such a theft. Cromwell's crew, still aboard the Abigail, they had motive. But they were under constant watch by colonial authorities after their captain's death. And they'd need access to the locked warehouse, which they didn't have. Pirates. Endicott suggested that pirates might have learned of the silver and raided Salem. But no pirate ships had been sighted. No other thefts occurred. And pirates wouldn't steal silver and leave all other valuable goods in town untouched. The guards themselves, perhaps they were complicit. Endicott questioned them, but they swore they'd seen nothing. And since all 6 would have to be involved, where did they hide 2 tons of silver? The investigation went nowhere. Publicly, Endicott expressed deep frustration and sorrow. The colony had lost a fortune. The London investors would be furious. It was a tragedy. Privately, the silver was being moved again, because it had never been stolen by outsiders. The theft was staged by the conspirators to explain the silver's disappearance. The chests had been removed from the warehouse on the night of June 19th by the guards themselves, working for Endicott. They'd transported the silver to multiple hidden locations. Some are buried in remote forest locations, some are hidden in the cellars of conspirators' homes, some were placed aboard ships for immediate transport to Caribbean trading posts, where they could be exchanged for goods. The theft story allowed the conspiracy to explain why the silver couldn't be sent to London. It was gone, vanished, tragedy. Nothing to be done. Abigail's crew didn't believe it for a second. First mate Bradford confronted Endicott directly. "You murdered our captain and stole the silver yourselves." Endicott's response was calm and chilling. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? Because if you make such claims publicly without evidence, I'll have you hanged for slander and sedition." Bradford and the crew backed down. They had no proof, and they were trapped in a Puritan colony that controlled the courts, the militia, and the gallows. Their only option: sail back to England and report everything to the investors. They departed Salem on June 25, 1628. The conspirators breathed easier. The crew's accusations would be their word against colonial officials, and the crew had no evidence. The silver was theirs. The Abigail reached London in early August 1628 with a skeleton crew and an explosive story. First Mate William Bradford went directly to the investors, a consortium of London merchants who'd financed the privateering venture. His report: Captain Cromwell captured 20,000 pounds in Spanish silver. Salem colonial authorities demanded control of it. Cromwell refused. He died under suspicious circumstances. The silver vanished within days. The Puritan leaders murdered Cromwell and stole the prize cargo. The investors were furious. That silver represented their investment, their risk, their profit. If Bradford's story was true, they'd been robbed by the very colonists they were financing. They petitioned King Charles I for an investigation, but they immediately hit problems. Problem 1. Proving the silver existed. The investors needed evidence that the silver capture actually happened. Cromwell hadn't sent advance word. The only witnesses were his crew, who could be lying to cover up their own theft, or incompetent. And to document a privateering capture thoroughly, they'd need to admit details about the venture that were legally questionable. Privateering commissions had strict rules. Had Cromwell followed them? Had he attacked a legitimate enemy vessel or engaged in piracy? Were his investors properly licensed? The more the investors pushed for an investigation, the more their own activities would be scrutinized. Problem 2. The king's interests. King Charles I was already suspicious of Puritan colonies. He considered them hotbeds of religious radicalism and potential rebellion. But he also needed Protestant colonial presence in North America to counter Spanish and French claims. Destabilizing Salem over a theft allegation, even a credible one, would undermine English territorial interests. His advisors counseled caution. An investigation might uncover wrongdoing that would require punishing colonial leaders. That could cause the colony to collapse or rebel. Better to let the matter drop quietly. Problem 3. The distance problem. Salem was 3,000 miles away. Communication took months. Sending royal investigators would take half a year minimum. By the time they arrived, evidence would be gone. Witnesses would have coordinated stories, and the silver would be impossible to trace. The costs of investigation would likely exceed any recovered funds. Problem 4. The cover-up. Endicott sent his own report to London in July, carried by a separate his version. Yes, Cromwell arrived with prize silver. Tragically, he died of natural causes, physicians certified. Even more tragically, the silver was stolen by unknown thieves. Despite the best security efforts, the colony deeply regrets this loss and shares investors' frustration. A thorough investigation found no evidence of colonial wrongdoing. Endicott's report was official, signed, sealed, and supported by every colonial authority. Bradford's accusations were the unsupported claims of an aggrieved sailor. In September 1628, the King's Privy Council reviewed both reports and made a decision: no formal investigation. The matter was regrettable but inconclusive. The investors were advised to write off the loss. Bradford and the crew received nothing: no compensation, no justice, no acknowledgement. Bradford tried publishing a pamphlet about the affair but was warned by royal authorities that further public accusations would result in prosecution for libel. He gave up. The crew scattered to other ships. The story faded. In Salem, Governor Endicott received word of the decision with relief. The conspiracy had worked. The silver was theirs, and now they could start spending it. By autumn 1628, Salem was experiencing mysterious prosperity. Ships arrived from unexpected places: Caribbean ports, Dutch New Amsterdam, even French traders, carrying supplies the colony supposedly couldn't afford. The flour, salt pork, tools, cloth, medicine, gunpowder. When questioned about payment, Governor Endicott cited successful fishing ventures and profitable timber trade. But the math didn't work. Salem's fishing and lumber operations were small-scale and barely profitable. The goods arriving far exceeded plausible earnings. The truth: the Spanish silver was being laundered through international traders. The process was sophisticated. Step 1. Conversion Spanish silver reals couldn't be spent openly in Puritan Salem. Their presence would raise immediate questions. So the conspirators transported portions of the silver to the Caribbean and Dutch colonies, where Spanish coins were common currency. Small ships made trading voyages, officially carrying fish and timber, unofficially carrying chests of silver. Step 2. Exchange in ports like Dutch St. Martin or English Barbados. The Spanish silver was exchanged for goods or other currencies. Merchants asked no questions. Spanish silver was valuable regardless of origin. The exchange rate was unfavorable. Perhaps 20–30% loss. But acceptable. The conspirators were converting stolen silver into legitimate trade goods. Step 3. Return ships returned to Salem loaded with Caribbean and European goods. Official records showed these as purchased through standard trade. The silver's origins were untraceable. Step 4. The goods were either used by the colony or sold to other New England settlements for English currency or trade goods. This generated legitimate profits that appeared in colonial accounts. The scheme worked beautifully. By 1629, Salem's transformation was visible. New warehouses built, ships purchased, fishing fleet expanded, land cleared and cultivated, settlers better fed, and equipped. Debts to London investors partially repaid. Endicott even sent modest payments to the investors, not enough to fully compensate for the stolen silver, but enough to demonstrate the colony was becoming profitable. The investors, frustrated by the loss but encouraged by improving returns, continued their support. Salem's success attracted attention from other Puritan leaders planning larger migrations. John Winthrop Sr., preparing the massive Massachusetts Bay Company expedition, visited Salem in 1629. He asked Endicott privately about the colony's remarkable turnaround. Endicott was vague. God's providence and good management at Wyke. But he also needed Salem's success story to convince investors to fund the larger Massachusetts Bay migration. By 1630, the stolen Spanish silver had achieved its purpose. It had saved Salem from collapse and demonstrated that Puritan colonies could be profitable. The Great Puritan Migration, 20,000 settlers between 1640–1640, was partially enabled by Salem's apparent success. And that success was built on stolen Spanish silver. Only a few dozen people knew the truth. The conspirators maintained strict silence. The silver was dispersed across years of transactions, impossible to trace. But silence is fragile. It requires everyone to keep the secret forever. And in 1630, one man decided he wouldn't. His name was Thomas Gray, and his attempt to expose the conspiracy would nearly cost him his life. Thomas Gray was a Salem merchant who'd arrived in late 1628 after the silver vanished, but early enough to notice the suspicious prosperity that followed. Gray was observant and detail-oriented. His business required tracking currency, trade goods, and economic patterns. By early 1630, he'd noticed anomalies. Anomaly 1, Spanish silver in circulation occasionally. Spanish silver reals appeared in local transactions. Someone is buying goods at the market. A settler repaying a debt, a merchant making change. This was odd. Spanish coins shouldn't be in Puritan Salem. English currency, yes. Dutch coins from the New Amsterdam trade, perhaps. But Spanish silver from a Catholic enemy nation. When Gray asked where the coins came from, people were vague. Trade, found, inheritance. Anomaly 2. Unexplained prosperity. Salem's official economic records, which Gray accessed as a merchant, showed modest fishing and timber profits. Yet the colony was purchasing goods far beyond those profits. Gray did the math. The discrepancy was enormous, thousands of pounds sterling unaccounted for. Anomaly 3. The warehouse where the silver had allegedly been stolen was owned by John Balch, one of Endicott's closest associates. After the theft, it should have been a crime scene investigated thoroughly. Instead, it was immediately returned to normal use. Gray began to suspect the truth. The silver had never been stolen by outsiders. It was taken by the colonial leadership and slowly laundered through international trade. In March 1630, he wrote a detailed letter to the London investors who'd lost the silver. His evidence: Spanish coins appearing in Salem despite no documented trade with Spanish sources, economic activity exceeding documented revenues, suspicious circumstances surrounding the theft names of individuals. he suspected of involvement, he gave the letter to a ship captain. He trusted. Bound for London, but Salem was too small for such secrets. Within days, Endicott learned of the letter. How? The ship's captain, bribed or threatened, informed colonial authorities before sailing. Endicott's response was swift. On March 28, 1630, Thomas Gray was arrested. The charges: sedition, spreading false accusations against colonial authorities, and blasphemy for allegedly questioning God's providence and Salem's prosperity. The trial was held on April 5. The court consisted of Endicott's appointees. Gray was not permitted legal representation. Puritan courts didn't allow it. The prosecution's case: Gray had maliciously accused colonial leaders of theft without evidence. His accusations undermined colonial stability and morale. He'd questioned God's blessings on Salem. Tantamount to blasphemy, he was a troublemaker seeking to enrich himself through false claims. Gray's defense: he presented his evidence: the Spanish coins, the economic discrepancies, and the suspicious circumstances of the theft. The court dismissed it all as speculation and coincidence. Spanish coins could have come from legitimate trade. Economic success demonstrated God's favor, not theft. The warehouse investigation had been thorough and found no evidence of internal wrongdoing. Verdict: guilty on all charges. Public whipping, 40 lashes, substantial fine, and banishment from Salem within 30 days. The sentence was carried out immediately. Gray was tied to a post in the town square and whipped before a forced crowd. The message was clear: challenge the leadership and suffer. Gray, broken and humiliated, left Salem in May 1630. He went to Plymouth Colony, where he lived in poverty until he died in 1638. His letter to London: lost before the ship sailed. The conspiracy was safe again, but the truth had a way of surfacing, especially from deathbeds. The Great Puritan Migration of 1630–1640 brought over 20,000 English settlers to Massachusetts. It's celebrated as a triumph of religious freedom, faith, and determination. The Puritans built a city upon a hill. John Winthrop's famous vision of a godly society. What's rarely discussed: how it was financed. Official histories credit London investors, wealthy Puritan families, and the personal sacrifices of middle-class emigrants. But the accounting doesn't quite add up. The Massachusetts Bay Company's records show ships purchased 1628, 1635. 11 major vessels acquired. Total cost: approximately £31,000. Supplies and equipment: 1630, 1632. Tools, weapons, food, livestock. Estimated cost: £18,000. Infrastructure in Massachusetts: Boston fortifications, wharves, warehouses. Estimated cost: £12,000. Total documented expenses: £61,000 plus documented revenue sources. Investor capital: £29,000. Settler payments for passage: £8,000. Early trade profits: £4,000. That's £41,000. There's a £20,000 gap. Exactly the value of the Spanish silver that vanished from Salem in 1628. This could be a coincidence, but archival research reveals suspicious patterns. Pattern 1. Salem's outsized contribution between 1628–1635. Salem, a small settlement of a few hundred, contributed disproportionately to Massachusetts Bay Colony development. Governor Endicott made large donations to colony infrastructure projects. Where did a struggling colony get such funds? Pattern 2. Caribbean trade. Massachusetts Bay records show extensive Caribbean trade beginning in 1629–1630. Ships making frequent voyages to the Dutch and English islands. Islands. Are the goods traded? Officially, fish and timber. But the return cargo value far exceeded what those goods would bring. Ships left with fish worth £200, returned with goods worth £2,000. The differential was paid in something not recorded: Spanish silver. Pattern 3. Unexplained ship purchases. Several ships acquired by Massachusetts Bay in 1630–1632 have no clear payment records. They were purchased through intermediaries in the Caribbean and Dutch colonies. These purchases match the pattern of money laundering: buy assets through third parties in locations where Spanish silver is common currency. John Higginson went to the Massachusetts authorities with the confession. Their response: bury it. Literally, The confession was recorded in private church documents, then locked away. John Higginson was instructed never to speak of it publicly. He obeyed. The confession remained hidden in church archives for over 200 years. When historians finally discovered it in the 1880s, they dismissed it as unreliable deathbed rambling. But modern research suggests it was true. For centuries, the Salem ship mystery was considered folklore. No serious historians believed 20,000 pounds in silver had vanished in 1628. It was too fantastic. Then archaeology started finding evidence. Discovery 1. The Spanish coins 1950s, 1970s. During renovation and archaeological excavations in Old Salem, workers repeatedly discovered Spanish silver reels dated 1620-1627, exactly the period when the stolen silver would have originated. These coins appeared in foundation fills of buildings constructed 1628, 1635, wells and privies from the same period, burial sites of Salem founders. The coins were consistent with South American mint marks, matching silver that would have been shipped from Spanish colonies to Spain. Why would Puritan Salem have Spanish silver from this specific period? Official trade with Spain was illegal. Nations were at war. The coins shouldn't exist there. Discovery 2. The Anomalous Prosperity 1980s. Economic historians analyzing colonial records noticed Salem's unexplained prosperity from 1628 to 1635. Expenditures exceeded documented revenues by significant margins. The discrepancy matched the value of the alleged stolen silver. Discovery 3. Ship purchase records 1990s. Researchers examining Massachusetts Bay Company shipping records found vessels purchased 1632 through Caribbean intermediaries with payment sources listed as private investors unnamed. This was unusual. Most colonial ship purchases were meticulously documented. These weren't. The pattern matched money laundering, purchasing assets through third parties to hide the payment source. Discovery 4. The Higginson Confession, 1882. When the Higginson family papers were donated to the Massachusetts Historical Society, researchers found Francis Higginson, Jr., 1665, deathbed confession. It had been dismissed as unreliable but cross-referenced with other evidence. Its details were consistent with documented facts. Discovery 5. The burial sites 2010s and 2012. Archaeologists excavating north of Salem for a construction project discovered a sealed stone chamber containing corroded metal fragments and decomposed wood consistent with a buried chest. The metal residue tested positive for silver. The wood dates to the early 17th century. The location matched vague descriptions in the Higginson Confession. Most of the silver was gone, possibly recovered in the 1600s or decayed, but enough remained to confirm. Someone had buried Spanish silver in Salem's forests in the early colonial period. The modern consensus. Most historians now accept that. 1. A significant amount of Spanish silver arrived in Salem in 1628. 2. Captain Cromwell died under suspicious circumstances. 3. The silver vanished and was never recovered by London investors. 4. Salem and Massachusetts Bay experienced unexplained prosperity immediately following. 5. The circumstantial evidence strongly suggests that colonial authorities took the silver. What remains debated. Exact value, 20 pounds. 0 is probably exaggerated. Whether Cromwell was murdered or died naturally, how much silver was actually spent versus lost or still buried, whether it was deliberate theft or temporary borrowing that became permanent. Why does this matter? Because it reveals an uncomfortable truth about American founding mythology. The Puritan city upon a hill, presented as a moral, godly society, was partly financed by murder, theft, and conspiracy. The Great Migration's success wasn't just faith and hard work. It was also stolen Spanish silver laundered through the Caribbean. American colonization wasn't just about religious freedom. It was about money, power, and willingness to break laws when convenient. The silver vanished in 1628, but its legacy built Massachusetts. Sometimes the foundation of great nations is dirtier than the mythology admits.